Right.
Going to go live here in just a few minutes, so.
Able to listen in, or is this taped or live on CC? How does this work?
Okay, it's live on YouTube and on the cable TV channel.
Do the share and subscribe thing, okay?
All right, just let me know when I'm supposed to. Budget committee meeting along with our council, and we look forward to having a good night and understanding how we've been doing for the last year. It's been a tough year. What with COVID and everything, we have much to learn about.
Yeah, I'm. Do you not see my picture?
I can't see your picture, Steve. And Shannon, I can't see you.
I'm looking at it, and it came on. It should be.
Yeah, I can't see either Steve or Shannon or Brad.
Steve, Scott's in the middle of his introductory address.
So
I was talking to Skip, sorry.
First off, as Jackie started before we started the meeting, I'd like to formally welcome Lynn Carson. Thank you, Lynn, for joining the Budget Committee. We look forward to getting to know you. And then also Shannon Cruz.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you, Shannon and Lynn. Look forward to getting to know you better.
Thank you.
We have a really good team here on the Budget Committee, but also staff that runs a great show and presents a really complete look at Lake Oswego's finances. So I think what we will do, Jennifer, if we can, is we'll do the roll call now. See who is here.
We should welcome Jennifer. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Jennifer is a new employee. That's right.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be a new liaison to the Budget Committee, so thank you. Okay, we'll do roll call. Calabria. Carson.
Here.
Raff.
I'm here.
Erickson. Erickson. Not here? Okay. Dodds.
Here.
Cruz. Here. Havens.
Here.
Studebaker.
Here.
Wendland.
Here.
Kohlhoff.
Here.
Lamont.
Here.
Wynn.
Here.
Mans.
Here.
And O'Neill.
Here.
All right. I'm just texting Charlie to see if he's hang on just a second. Okay. Okay, so that's roll call in the Jennifer. Everybody except Charlie Erickson, right? Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. That is a quorum. Okay. So I would like to put forth the minutes from May 9th, 2019. That is a long time ago, but we need to approve them. So they were sent around by Sean And does anyone have any comments in regard to those minutes? All right, then I need a motion to approve the minutes, please, in a second.
Move to approve the minutes from May 9th, 2019.
That's John. And a second from whom?
Second, Jackie.
Okay, Jackie, you're right. Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes from May 9th, 2019, say, I think we have to do a roll call, don't we, Jennifer? Because we can't do
do need to
ayes.
do a roll call because it's hard to know that over the Zoom meeting. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quick roll call here. Calabria,
Aye.
Carson,
Aye.
Raff,
Aye.
Dodds,
Aye.
Cruz,
Aye.
Havens,
Aye.
Studebaker,
Yes.
Wendland,
Yes.
Kohlhoff,
Yes.
Lamont,
Yes.
Wynn,
Yes.
Mans,
Yes.
O'Neill.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Scott, I like the Casablanca video shot on your face.
What's that?
You get kind of a Casablanca kind of look. You could do Bogart right now. And you
Little film noir there, yeah.
So I just texted with Charlie, but I think he's going to try to get on, Jennifer. So we'll just wait to see if he gets on. Okay.
Of the budget. This is kind of the agenda, and I'll go over a little bit about PERS and where our UAL is and what it means. And we surprisingly did get the rates for the next biennium yesterday morning. Well, the PERS board has them in their agenda. They haven't approved them yet. It's for their October 2nd meeting. So I do have a slide on that as well.
Sean, excuse me, Sean, I can see everybody's face, but I don't see any exhibits. Am I doing something wrong?
Can everyone else see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I must be doing something wrong here.
I can also tell you, Al, which page of that financial report that I sent out.
That'll be fine.
Okay. So this is, like I said, I would like to start with kind of the overall of where the city is sitting right now. As far as revenues go, because I know with COVID, it's kind of, I get a lot of questions about it. As Martha had already stated, we're actually doing where we thought we would for the budget, or we're doing better in most cases. We're sitting really well. We started the year with more. We actually received more in property taxes than we budgeted, and we've gotten a few rebates, but I'll go more into that later. So we're actually sitting really, as far as the general fund goes. Now, there are two areas where there is some concern, and it really has to do more with where there's sales involved. And it's during, March, April, May, June, and it's the end of the 12 months, like hotel motel tax, there just wasn't anyone staying in the hotels. So we didn't really get our usual revenues, and I'll go more in detail on that. And then gas taxes, people weren't driving. So our state shared revenues for gas taxes were down. But we are so dependent, as Martha said, on property taxes. And that really, we get 92% of our property taxes in November, December timeframe. So we received most of our property taxes before the COVID actually became a deal for us. Like she said, it'll affect us for 2021, but not so much in 1920. So the first thing I want to do, though, is kind of explain the report a little bit that I sent out. I tried to in the email. What I was trying to really do is show by fund, but then also by department. So it's kind of broke up between like the library and muni court and police and fire and the general administration. So that's like myself, the city manager's office, IT, HR. We kind of make that up. But so that kind of breaks it down by the category of, in this case, as revenues would be property taxes, and the expenditure side we're really talking about like personal services, materials and services, capital outlay, debt service. Those are the higher level categories that we budget by. So what I wanted to do is, so in this first column, it's really telling you what the current budget or the biennial budget, what would we budget for the 2 years. So that's what this column does. And then this one is really June because I had to pick a month on my system. It's just our software makes me do that. So I said to skip this one, but the fiscal year, it's the 12 months. So how does the 12 months compare to the 24-month budget? And there are certain items that are annual things like property taxes. So we know we really want to be here in the percent used, or in this case, percent received at 50%, you know, and as far as like a revenue goes at 50% or better, we're tracking really well for the first 12 months. In our expenditure, 50% or less, we're tracking really well for things that are annual. So they happen twice. Now, things like beginning fund balance only happens once. So we want to be at 100% at that number. So you can kind of see here, that's why that one is at 100%. So, but what I was trying to get at is how are we tracking in the first 12 months? And this was about the best report I could find in our software to give that to you. And then I tried to break it down by fund. So the only other quirk on how we have to run stuff in our software and budget is we show all of the non-specific general fund revenues in the general fund come into the general administration. And so like property taxes, franchise fees, and state shared revenues, so liquor tax, cigarette tax, some licenses and fees, that kind of stuff. And then we have to reallocate that to the other departments. And so you can kind of see that here for the general revenue. So you'll see it in general admin as a negative 74 million. You can see this is how it's actually allocated between all of the different departments in the general fund. So that's just kind of a weird quirk that we don't want to double count the revenue once in the police department and once in general admin. So you'll see it come in. So it nets, as you can see, it nets to zero. So it makes the report clean. That's kind of the housekeeping thing. Now we'll get into the more fun, why numbers are how they ended. So the first one.
Sean, can I just have a question?
Okay.
And I guess procedurally, do we raise our hand physically on the screen to ask a question? Usually we have our name tags we put up. How do we do it?
This is going to be a little difficult because I only have a small bar where I can see 4 people. So if I can get to the end, I'll bring back up this won't take me more than, I only have 10 slides for this, maybe a few for PERS. So it won't take me more than 10 minutes. And then we'll do questions at that point where I can stop sharing and we can see all the screens.
Yeah, my question is more just understanding the format. Just
okay. Well, now's a good time.
Okay. So so line 302, we had $21.7 million to start the 2 year or start the year, because you said that's a 1 year thing. Over the last 12 months was 23.8, but then we came out better by about 2 million. Is that, so I'm reading that right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the first thing I'm going to explain. Yes.
Okay, cool. Then I understand it. So that's what I just want to make sure I'm hearing you right. Okay.
Yeah. So this is what we budgeted. This is what we estimated. This is what we thought we were going to have. This is actually what we started July 1st with, 2019. And so what didn't we know then that we do now? And it really came down to two real big items. Was the beginning. Property taxes came in about 1.1 million more than we estimated. After knowing what the AV for the city was, we still didn't know exactly how much we were going to, how much people were going to pay in March and June. We don't know that until later on. And so we were off by a couple $100,000 to our favor because we're pretty conservative when it comes to revenues. But we also received about $900,000 in a one-time delinquent tax from Comcast. There was a debate over their personal property since before I got to the city in 2010, and it had been going on. And then finally right before that, we did receive an extra $900,000. So that was over half of this. And then the other half is our investment income was underestimated, and it had to do more with, for years we were getting, so here's where we invest with this the state treasury and the local government investment pool. And here's the rates that we were receiving back in 17 and 18. This is kind of what we budget on, is these numbers down here. And then all of a sudden, as stocks and everything went up, so did bonds that we can invest in. And so it brought everything up right here. And so we were getting more for a little bit, 2.6, 2.4, 2.7% on our income, where we were getting like 1.1, 1.3, 1.4. So we received a lot more in investment income. Unfortunately, now you can see as of July 23rd, we're back at 1%. So this was just a little wave that went through, but it really helped on the balances that we have as our ending balance and our contingencies. So, just in case money, that actually brought a lot more income for us to use in building the next budget. Or if an emergency happens between now that we, to get to. So that's kind of why the beginning balance is that. So really a lot, we got one big settlement from on the Comcast property tax thing. And we also received a lot more in investment income. I wasn't going to talk about property taxes. We're at 50%. We're about halfway through the year, so we're looking pretty good where we should be. The next one is is the miscellaneous revenue. And it's the exact same thing. We received so much more in investment income. So we budgeted about 700,000. We received about 600,000 last year in investment income. So it was about twice what we expected. But we also received 2 insurance rebates, one from our health insurance and one from our workers' comp insurance. It was over about $500,000. So between getting the extra money in investment income and then the extra for our insurance rate, we can't always count on that. We don't know what the premium, what the usage is going to be and that kind of stuff. So this is, again, good news, but one-time funds that came in. So, like I said, I'm going to try to focus on things over here that are rather large and aren't near 50%, because at 50%, it's what we expect. The next would be our intergovernmental revenues that are the various departments in the general fund receive. So a lot of this is grants. So in this case, like the ACC gets Meals on Wheels grants from the county and a couple other grants. Planning might get a little grant. Police sometimes get some bulletproof vest kind of grants and stuff. But what you're seeing is these numbers like 2,300%. And so the grant that we did receive was the CARES money. So we've received so far for the last fiscal year about $480,000. Over half of was planning. So all the money that we gave to the businesses as the business grants, we have received that money back. Plus all of any kind of PPE, anything, almost anything, and any kind of overtime that the Parks Department is doing for the fields and and the parks, keeping people there. Police, anyone that has any kind of like that we have all been compensated for. The only thing that didn't really qualify under the CARES Act of any that we've been tracking is the money we set aside for the utility assistance, and that's because revenue replacement is not allowed, and by giving the money and then giving it back to us, it's considered revenue replacement. Next is down here under general admin. We're into the expenditures. And well, the reason that transfers isn't there is because this transfer that the general fund is putting into the capital projects reserve for the general or for the city's portion of the city hall project. Not all of the project is being covered under Laura. So that's why this isn't at, exactly at 5 million. It's because a big chunk of it is coming this year. Again, you can kind of see here, there's the general fund contribution to the capital reserve. That's why it's not at 50%. Then we get to the tourism fund. This is the one that it gets of the 6% tax, hotel motel tax that we have. It gets 1.4% of it, of the 6%. So it gets just under a quarter, but without anyone staying in the hotels or very few people, they're really, we would have expected to see 350,000. We've seen 222. I thought a good illustration of this is here's the throughput through PDX. So our hotels really have more business, I think, more than, not that this isn't the most, everyone's coming here to see, for vacation and stuff. But you can kind of see, it used to be at about 21,000 a day. Now we're sitting at 900 a day, 1,200 a day, 1,800 a day. So this is kind of why there just isn't the business travel that there was. Not so the hotels over off Bangui over there are probably not seeing the occupancy that we would like. Next is the Public Art Fund. Now this one, we didn't budget here. So this is the 1.5% that for city hall or for city projects that qualify for it. 1.5% goes to this fund. 1% is for art, and then the other 0.5% is for maintenance. And this is the portion of the city hall. So the maintenance is to pay for, in this case, what we use it for is to pay the Arts Council to maintain our art and do the art program, that kind of stuff. That's kind of the maintenance part of it. The other part. So what this one's really needing is a budget adjustment that I still need to do before the end of the year, allowing this capital to be spent. So you can kind of see capital isn't high enough. And the other thing I kind of highlighted here is why these are a little higher is after the budget was adopted in June, council approved the Arts Council budget for about 50,000 more a year than what we had in the budget. Knowing that it was for a 2-year budget, we had time to come back when we had more items to do a budget adjustment for. So this will be done in the next few months. Come back and get that adjusted. The sewer fund, this is kind of more my favorite one. We were able to refinance the second round of lowest bonds. So, this the initial was 35 million. We refinanced 25 million. It should save the city $3.8 million in interest payments over the 15 years, or a net present value of $3.3 million. So, not, good stuff. And then there's the street fund, again, intergovernmental. What there really is to say about that one is why we do have the state shared revenue with the gas tax, and that has come in a little bit less than what we had hoped or had been budgeting for. We also hadn't budgeted anything for the county registration fee. And we didn't do that because when they had passed it for the Selwood Bridge, they had enough voters come back and get rid of it. And we didn't want to budget something and then not be able to do any projects that we had budgeted for. We had estimated that would be about $350,000, but we really only got about 180 last year from the registration fee, and we were down a couple $100,000 in the other one. So they about offset each other off. So that was actually pretty good news. The other good news is with interest rates being down, we were able to, on the same $700,000 a year debt service that we wanted, instead of getting the 10.4 we had estimated, we got 12.5 to use on all the paving and everything that's been going on around the city over the summer. So that was also really good news. The reason debt service is we only had to make one of the 2 debt service payments for the year. So we're only, there'll be 2 more to make up for the next year. That's why the debt service payments are low. And really, that's kind of the things that aren't at the 50%. So it really comes back to, we're looking really good at franchise fees. They're coming in right where they are. Our state shared revenues, for the most part, are coming in. Yeah, our gas taxes are down, but we have an offset from the county registration fee, and our property taxes are looking really good. When the recession hit in 2009, we had a collection rate of 93.9%. We budget 94%. So even if our collection rate comes down from the 95 percentile, or it's been now back down a little bit, we still should get at least what we budgeted. And now I'm going to quit sharing so I can see hands. Jackie? Oh, sorry, Councilor Mance?
You can call me Jackie. That's fine. And this is anecdotal. A lot of wires have gone up on our telephone poles, many of which I believe to be CenturyLink. I don't know what other cable companies. Are we seeing an uptick in franchise fees because of the wires?
That I'm not sure. I know, because really, we get about $2.7 million a year in franchise fees. Our largest one is Comcast for cable, and then Frontier's our next one at like 20,000. So we get about 600,000 from Comcast, and we get about 1.2 million from PGE, 400,000 from both Northwest Natural and the garbage company. There's a slew of little ones that we get like 2,000 or 3,000 from, but they don't really. When you're looking at the budget like this, I don't really see it compared to like Comcast where we get so much.
Okay, and then quickly, on the gas tax, you didn't see the decrease that you thought that you would see overall, and do you think it's picking up again?
We did see a decrease. Our gas revenue that we get actually lags by about 2 or 3 months by the time we actually get the revenue from it. So we get March and about June, July. Okay. That's when we get that payment. So we did see it go down by about $300,000. We had budgeted about 2.7 million for the gas tax station revenue part. But what we did get kind of to offset some of that was the almost $200,000 in the county
registration, right?
So
and it remains, I think the same lag happens with the transient lodging tax fee. Is that correct?
It does, but we get that on a monthly basis, so it doesn't lag as much. It's the state shared revenues because the state collects them and then they mull them over for a while, and then they disperse them. It takes about 3 months.
Okay.
The lodging is about a month or two.
And great job on refinancing our bonds. That was fabulous. Thank you. I'm done.
Councilor Lamont?
Sean, can you just clarify a little bit more on that transient hotel tax? So we went down pretty far because nobody's coming for business, so to speak, but now we're coming back up. So I think you said of the 350 or 400,000 that we usually get in, we're at like 222,000, I think, has come in, or not. Was that a misreading?
Yeah, no, I was really just going off the first 12 months. I would say almost all of that came in the first 7 months. We really didn't receive anything for the prior 5 months. So we get in the first 5 months of a fiscal year, because the summer's there, we get about half of our transient lodging tax.
All right,
Yeah,
so we got some of that in.
We're down about 30%.
Come up.
So if you took 350 or 400,000 minus 30%, that's where we're at.
No, I mean, we're down to like 30% of normal.
Bringing it in.
Yeah, so we're down about 70%. So
Okay, so then in that note, are we covering the Beluga turf, or has that already been passed through and we bought that already done?
I think that was that was in the previous budget cycle.
Okay, thank you.
That's a long time ago.
the challenge with those tourism funds, as you know, is we probably won't be able to do the grants next year.
Mr. Calabria?
Sean, I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. The net favorable fund balance, when you look at all the account categories, is it wrapped up in that line 302 under general administration? So is it, I understand we have a $2.1 million favorable fund balance relative to how we budgeted? Or
Yeah, as far as the beginning fund balance, yes. We're favorable over $2 million. By the end of the first year, because we also received extra monies, we're probably more like three and a half million for, as we're sitting in the mid-cycle, but not knowing how things are going. That's why I said we're sitting very well, but yes, to your question. Yes.
So is it correct to say that all the subcategories and accounts roll up into that line 302? Is that correct?
That's just the general administration. Each department also, they keep whatever they don't spend to work on council goals too. So they save theirs for their own capital needs. So police keeps theirs for capital needs, like they're gonna have to use it for furniture for city hall, the police cars, that kind of stuff. Fire uses it for fire trucks. Parks uses it to start chipping away at things on their unfunded list. So really, what that is that's the amount over what we gave the departments. And so if we and then general admin coming in less than budget too. So that's really, that number is, like I said, it's really the money that isn't get allocated out to the different departments, I guess, in the general fund. It's the funds that we would come back in March or in April and go, if there are extra funds, where do you want us to focus? I mean, we usually use council goals for that. So, and during the budget cycle or process, it's kind of built by, we start with last year's budget and for the operating budget, and then council goes to goal setting. They set their goals. We try to work them in with the funds that are available, and then we present a budget to the budget committee, and then that's when you guys look at all of everything, and then it gets approved, and then or changed and approved, whatever, and then it goes to council for final adoption.
Okay, so is it just in final clarification? Is it correct to refer to that as available funds for, if we're looking for resource allocations, changes in the budget for the second year of the biennium? Is it correct to say that there's 2.1 million available from that fund, that source?
Yes, you could say that. The budget committee can't make any changes to the 1921 budget. That's done through supplemental budget by the council at this point. So like when I had to go get a budget adjustment to refinance the $25 million worth of sewer bonds, council adopt, it's in their court now to make those changes. But yes, those funds are available if needed.
Okay, thank you.
I have a technical question before we take the next question. Jennifer, are you there? This is Scott.
I am here.
So I can't see that little screen that shows who's got their hands up, and I'm not worried about the folks that I can see on the screen, but there may be some folks that have a question that I can't see. For instance, Shannon, if you've got a question, I won't be able to see you raise your hand.
Okay. Right now, I'm
Oh, there
just
you
listening.
Go
Yes,
to
just
go to the
listening.
top right of your screen where it says speaker view and click on that to get an option.
Speaker
I know
view.
it says over here. Mhm. You can tell.
I prefer the gallery view because then I can see everybody.
Chair Havens, I believe you may need to click at the bottom where it says participants.
Right, participants. There we go. Okay, that's the one. Okay, I'll make that work. Okay, sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, Sean, I think you saw my comments. Great job on finding that additional revenue. Always good to see, and always got to give credit to the finance guy. So nice work. What's the minimum? Is there a percent minimum of the general admin part of the general fund that we have to maintain as a balance? Is that set by city council? Is that set by the state? And what is it?
It's set by policy. I mean, the council's did it, but it's a policy minimum at this point. It's about, well, it's just over 30%. There's a 16% ending fund balance requirement of, and then we're talking operating budget, and a 14% contingency. The ending balance is really what we use to get from July to the property taxes in the beginning of December and in November. To get to those payments, we need money to actually get us there. So that's what that balance there is for. I think it's right around 17 million.
Thank you.
I mean, that's ballpark, but yeah.
Okay. So so then at 11 million, we are under that threshold?
I think we're at like 21 million. That, when we started the year at 21 million.
Yep.
I think we were, with everything in there, we were about 2 million to the good. When we actually bring a budget, there really isn't anything left in there. It's if there's leftover money, like in this budget in particular, you council moved to put whatever savings we had or we estimated having into the reserve for the city hall project.
Right. So if I'm reading this right, at the bottom of line item 10 at the top of general fund of budget, there's 10.89 million of budget remaining at the end of June 30th, which will then carry over as the current. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's where it's a little confusing where that 78%, that's why I would try not to look at that, because what you have is it's being offset by the 21.7 million of fund balance beginning. This is basically all the budgeted resources. And that's because that's a one-time dollar amount.
Mhm.
That's gonna throw off that percentage. But yeah, that's what it's basically saying, is that we should be netting 10, but also there's
So
a
10 will carry over into the next budget.
no,
Starting
no,
balance.
no, I think that's just saying that that's what I'm trying to think of how to explain that. That's really because what the budget remaining is basically saying this is how much of the 2-year budget that's still available. But with that negative number in there that we're allocating out to the other departments, it makes it more confusing.
Okay.
And this, I could probably come up with a number, but not right on the spot right here. Like I said, this was really just me trying to do the category to where we are at the 12 months out of 24. Sorry.
All good. Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Anyone? All right. Oh, sorry. Counselor Mans, Jackie.
Yes, you may have discussed this, but long ago, we put together the Gateway Art piece using money from the tourism fund. It was a very expensive product. It should be awesome when it's delivered. My concern, and I honestly haven't paid that much attention to it, is if we will have tourism funds to pay for it, if that money was in fact budgeted and is sitting there in a holding pattern.
So we have taken a look, Sean's smiling, because we have taken a look at the Gateway art project. That money is committed.
Very
So,
good.
so we will fund that project, especially because they're under contract and the artist is actually producing the work. So
Thank you.
Daniel.
So Sean and Martha, you're saying that earlier in the presentation, you had mentioned that as cities, we don't see the impact of a recession or a decline in revenues until maybe one or two years after the fact. So are you saying in essence that this is going to be as good as it gets in terms of revenues, and we should be anticipating
but it's gonna be really shallow here. So that's what I was trying to say, because we're so, and you all know because you've been on the budget committee long enough, the relationship between real market value and property taxes and assessed value. In Lake Oswego, our gap is so big that even when we have a recession, because our assessed value, the amount we tax on people's property, is so far below market, right? That we'd have to have like a 40% or 50% decline in property taxes before we'd start to see a reduction in revenue here. What we probably will see, although I have to say it isn't happening in this recession like it did in 2008. What happened in 2008 was all construction activity stopped. And so the part of our revenue that was dependent on increasing the amount of assessed value in our town stopped during the last recession, but that's not happened this time. We're still seeing a lot of development happening in town. So I expect that Sean's very conservative and your all very conservative approach to setting a property tax number is going to once again serve you well in terms of really recession proofing the general fund departments. I think you're going to continue to see those that are more dependent on consumer activity, like the tourism fund and gas taxes, be either slow or negative growth. Although I will also say state shared revenues may go up because people are drinking more. And I count bottles in my neighborhood recycle bins, and I know this is true. So I think the reality is we're very likely to see our revenues just sort of flatten and never go down. And but I also, as I said before, with local governments, sometimes the economy is booming and we're still sort of in this very flat revenue constrained environment. We're just very, very stable. And I think Sean would agree that that's likely what we'll see. And at the end of the meeting, I want to talk to you a little bit about sort of what I see the budget challenges for the next fiscal year being, and we'll talk more about those in March, because the reality is you guys can't do very much under Oregon law right now.
So Martha, are you then seeing your SDCs still kind of staying similar and
Still
flat? And,
very high.
oh, so they're increasing.
Well, I would say that the impact of COVID hasn't changed the pace of construction.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
John?
So two questions. One, the construction activity has been very active. In fact, I would say it's even more active than normal. Do you think we're going to have any sort of a bump in that? Do you project that would give us additional base revenue where the assessment would go up? In other words, are we going to be, instead of a 3% increase that's typical, do you think we'll be more at a 3.5 or 4%?
Yeah, Sean,
increase?
why don't you take this one?
We usually have about a 3.5 to 4% increase every year in our taxes, and that's what it is. We don't have a whole lot of place to grow out, but we do have a lot of remodel, and a large enough remodel that it triggers a little bit of an assessment adjustment. But so, yeah, I would say easily a 3.5 to 4.
I guess the tea leaves that I don't know that we can read yet is the effect of the recession on commercial construction or in migration to Oregon, because some of the growth we've seen in the last few years has been sort of just general growth of the region. And so usually during recessions, people stop moving. Of course, we haven't seen that here either. We still see record highs in terms of property transactions happening. So, I mean, I guess you guys' guess about what's going to happen to commercial space and commercial construction is as good as mine.
Yeah, I mean, right now, real market value to assessed value is like 60%. It's pretty low.
Right.
In the worst of the recession of the housing market, we had gotten as close as 83%. So we have a large cushion for our property taxes.
Right. So question number two, because of the hospitality and the transportation taxes being more than anticipated because of COVID, the entities still need to kind of function. I mean, I know that we may not be making grants, but is there any possibility that we could help supplement those funds, the shortfall, even partially, to help offset some of those things? Because part of the hospitality tax is to get people back into Lake Oswego. And so I guess my point is, maybe we need to invest in order to have people come to Lake Oswego and spend their money once COVID ends. Do we want to go a whole year without those revenues being spent? I guess that's whether we can do that this year or not, I don't know.
Yeah, let me write that down, because the reality is that until some of the events can come back, you guys providing grants to events that don't take place isn't like a really great use of funds. So, but let me write that down, because it's something we'll pay attention to and come back and visit with you about if it looks like it'd be useful.
Don, it may be too with the things that are going on in Portland, that some of the people would go downtown Portland for restaurants, maybe coming here instead.
Free parking.
Councilor John Lamont.
Martha and Sean, you both said that, we're getting revenue backfills from the state or the feds. Do we see much more of that happening? I know the county just got a big chunk. Is it pretty done, or is there still applications in to get more?
We have a grant for up to about $1.2 million, and we've spent over 600,000 that we've gotten back. So each month I put in a new request for our chunk they've committed to us. My biggest fear is that they decide to stop doing it at one point. I mean, this only goes through December. If they quit doing it and want to the state decides they want to do the money and spend it on something and then allocate it out to the cities on their benefit, but right now, that's what we're
So
doing.
we're using that for two things. Correct me if I'm wrong. One is the backfill on revenues for the city staff, but also for some of our pot of money for the businesses. Is that correct?
Yeah, can I start with it, Sean, and then you can fill in the businesses. So we can only use it to reimburse direct expenses that the city incurred as a result of COVID. So I want to be really clear, we cannot use it to backfill revenues. So the lost, I'm saying this out loud because this has been a big issue at the state level. So all of the overtime, all of the equipment that we've purchased, and I believe the business assistance grants that the council funded early in the crisis, those all are reimbursable, but this is to reimburse like our overtime, not to backfill our lost tourism revenue, for example.
Thank you.
Okay, others. Councilor Jackie.
Thank you. I just want to remind everyone that the transient lodging tax is for hotels, Airbnb, B&Bs only. Restaurants do not pay transient lodging tax. So that's a very important component when we're looking at helping our restaurants by pulling whatever money we may get from hotels, et cetera, et cetera. Not that that couldn't be done, but bear in mind, it's hotel tax only.
Okay. Any others? Okay, then Martha, I think you said you wanted to talk about where all the good news is coming up.
Well, actually, no, I think what I'd like to do now is, if you don't mind, Scott, shift to the discussion about street capital,
Okay,
which is what
we'll
the
do that.
council asked us to do back in June. And then after Erica's done and you're done with her, I'd like to just sort of talk about what Sean and I are seeing on the horizon for the upcoming biennium.
Okay,
Okay?
great.
Thank you. All right, Erica, take us away.
All right, good evening, everyone. Give me a second here and I'll work on sharing my screen. Did that work?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hang on. It's always getting started is always kind of a little. All right. Okay. Thank you again, Chair Havens and Mayor, councilors, and the committee members. Welcome to the new folks who have joined us this year. Again, I'm Erica Rooney. I'm the city engineer and director of the engineering and water treatment plant. With me tonight, of course, is Anthony Hooper, our deputy city manager and public works director. Anthony and I share the street fund, so Anthony will try to kick me from a distance if I make a mistake. But we do cooperatively work on the street fund together, along with all the other utility funds, utility fund that we won't speak about tonight. But anything that's infrastructure related, Anthony and I pretty much share those funds. And then, of course, Sean's there to help us put it all in context with the larger funds, the larger budget as a whole. The last time that I was in front of this particular group was, as we mentioned before, back in May of 19, which seems like about 5 years ago, not just a year and a half. Whew. And I went back and looked at some of those notes and whatnot. And at that time, my focus was to provide an overview of the capital improvement plan as a whole. That's traditionally what we do at those budget committee meetings. In June of this year, we did give a presentation to City Council about the street fund as a whole. And what I'm going to do tonight is kind of take that to the next level, which is to focus on the street fund, and in particular, the capital expenditure, where we are right now, and some issues facing us in the future. So therefore, This presentation has two main objectives. First of all, I want to review the current biennium street fund budget in a little bit more detail. And this is a repeat for some of you folks who, the council in particular, but with new people on the budget committee, it's good to do just a brief review and synopsis. The second objective will be to share the story of the unmet needs in the street fund, and we'll talk about paving and pathways in particular. But as you'll see, the street fund actually supports much more than just that, and we need to keep that in mind. So let's get started with the quick review. A few slides will look familiar to some of you, but again, I'm going to abbreviate it. I'm going to go quickly over the current street fund by breaking it into three major areas as shown here: revenue, expenditures, and capital outlay. The revenue, where does the money come from? So we've talked about this before and a couple of conversations about it already this evening. As you'll recall, we started out our first biennium budget in effective July 1 of 2019. And this is the budget revenue that was reviewed and approved by the budget committee. And this is a 2-year period for our expected revenue is a bit over $18 million, with $6 million generally coming from street maintenance fee, which is on your utility bill, almost another $6 million coming from state gas and registration fees, state gas tax and registration fees, excuse me, a $6 million contribution from the general fund, and then more recently, the county vehicle registration fee. We did not have that, as mentioned before, we did not have that budgeted at the time that we set up this budget, but it is anticipated to come in at about 9 million, no, 0.9 million, there's a difference, on an annual basis. But generally speaking, again, about 2 million, excuse me, about 20 million, about 18 million, I'm looking at the wrong notes there, about 18 million over a 2-year period. That's our revenue sources. And what do the expenditures go for? So where do we spend that 18 million in this 2-year budget? Well, it's a lot of different components. Unlike the other utility funds that have a kind of a narrower focus, such as water and sewer, the street fund basically covers any and all expenses associated with everything within the public right-of-way, from the roadway and all the items above the surface. There's over 155 miles of centerline streets in the city, and everything associated with those roads must be supported by the street fund. The street fund also pays for the electricity to run the signals and the street lights and the water runoff from the medians. And water also in the medians. We pay that fee. So you can see here is a list of all the different things that we have in the street fund that we pay for. These items tend to have a short lifespan. In comparison, we often build water and sewer lines with a life cycle of about 40 to 50 years. Most of the items in the street fund don't have that kind of a life cycle. For instance, striping needs to be refreshed every year. Signs lose their reflectivity after about 10 to 20 years, maybe even less. Street lighting, while we've done some amazing improvements in that area in the last several years, and Anthony's team has done a yeoman's job of replacing those into LEDs, sometimes the poles are susceptible to being hit and need replacement, and then just sometimes you get a bad bulb, but they don't have quite the life cycle of the underground infrastructure. And then, of course, there's the big thing that we all talk about at this committee meeting and throughout the city, which is paving. And we hope to get about 20 years on an arterial roadway, but it depends on many factors. So just again, this list here tells you what some of our other attributes are and assets that we have to maintain as a part of the street fund. The bridges, we have 8 of them in the city. We have 35 full traffic signals and 8 flashers, a few more coming on with the new Boones Ferry Road project. And just as a reminder, our pavement condition index during our last study was at 69. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move through this. A general breakdown of the street fund, though, is into 3 major categories. The engineering department, and this pays for the staff in the engineering department in my area, the transfers, and a number of special services or studies, such as the signal master plan, our roundabout analysis, and things like that. Keep in mind, there are many other staff within engineering that don't do just capital projects specifically, but rather are stewards of the right-of-way. For instance, permits for street opening cuts, traffic control plans for private developers or franchise utilities when they come in and need to cut up the street to put in a line, Northwest Natural, PGE. Development review services for new development. All of that is paid for and supported by the street fund. There's also a line item in there was the debt service for the bond that we talked about earlier, and we'll discuss that a little bit further. Then the Public Works, Anthony's department, Public Works and Maintenance. We've mentioned that there's a maintenance staff and there's the crews that do everything on that list that we saw before, everything from street sweeping all year long, sanding and plowing in the winter, debris removal after windstorms such as we just had, ditch restoration for roadway runoff, sign installation and removal, striping, and streetlight replacement. Our signals are maintained and operated with an agreement with the Clackamas County Signals Department, and that comes out of this budget as well. The last major category is capital outlay. And then the current biennium, we had nearly $17 million in capital work, 98% of that going towards paving. And some new maintenance was needed. Some new equipment was needed in the maintenance department, a sweeper being one of the bigger items that we've had to purchase in this biennium. Now to dig deeper into capital outlay, because that's where we're headed for this conversation. Just as a reminder, as I said, 98% of the capital in this biennium has been earmarked for paving. A small amount has been set aside for pathways and curb ramps, and then in particular, the Noss Road Pathway Project, which should be substantially complete by the end of this current fiscal year in June of 2021. We're about ready to finish up design, and we'll be putting that out to bid over the winter. And again, that should be under construction in the spring and wrap that up, if not by the end of the fiscal year, early or by the middle of summer. All right, so that's where we are now. That's the 2-year biennium budget and how it was built and what the expenses were anticipated to be and how it was budgeted. Now I want to focus on the future. Before jumping into the future, though, I do want to start by replaying a bit of the history first. As many of you will recall, for several years, one of the clear council goals was to increase the pavement condition index, or PCI as we like to call it, to at least 70. With that direction, the finance department went out and secured a bond for specifically helping us to meet that goal by significantly increasing our effort in paving. That's the $12 million bond that Sean alluded to earlier. We hired a consulting firm to be the city's representative and significantly increased our output using those funds. The ramping up of that effort began in the fall of 2017 when we hired the consultants. And in the fall of 2019, we had our bond money in place. And we'll talk about how that's been spent in a few slides. The adopted biennium budget was approved in the spring of 19 with the intent that the bond would be in place by fall of 19, and it was. So we anticipated that coming in. And fortunately, Sean got us even a few more extra $1 million. Thank you, Sean. I can't thank him enough. I owe him a lifetime of coffee, I think. Since then, the council's goal setting in January of 2020, there's been a further expansion of the goals and priorities, and that has included a number of other items. I want to talk about that for a minute. Here are the specific goals associated with the street fund that came out of the January 2020 goal setting effort. Again, pavement quality is listed here with a PCI of 70 or above. Our 3-year roadway surveys that we do our roadway surveys every 3 years, and they tell us how much we need each year to maintain the PCI or to improve the PCI. And we don't really have a long-term funding strategy to do that to a level that'll meet what that report recommends. Therefore, you can expect the overall PCI could dip down in the future years because this bond is a one-time infusion, which is great, loving it. It's wonderful. We've been able to do some amazing things, as you all know. But if you don't keep up that level or higher, eventually the PCI does come back down. The other goal was to adopt a 5-year plan for pathways. The transportation system plan is a 20-year plan and has hundreds of pathways listed in it, addressing gaps in our system. There's over $120 million worth of bike and pedestrian projects identified to fill the gaps in our existing infrastructure. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then, of course, another one was to improve bike ped safety and reduce congestion on Highway 43, on the Highway 43 McVeigh Stafford corridors. But much like the Boones Ferry Road project, in order to develop a cross-section that is amenable to a variety of stakeholders, an engaging planning effort is really needed on this corridor. And similarly, a dedicated or set aside amount of money needs to be identified. While staff can certainly do a preliminary layout to show what a major arterial section looks like when overlaid in the McVeigh corridor, the on-the-ground impacts are substantial, and public engagement will be critical for determining what level of improvement is truly preferred and what trade-offs may be necessary for those improvements. We may be able to find a few things that are easy to install, but major modifications to that corridor is going to be a significant project. And the last goal on here was to continue the Safe Routes to School project prioritization, specifically assigned to TAB, the Transportation Advisory Board. We did make progress on that despite the slowdown with COVID, which set everybody back, but we did end up and TAB was able to provide a final recommendation of the prioritized school associated projects to the council in July. And I'll speak more on that in a few minutes and share with you the results of that. So with these goals in mind, and with the ongoing needs and expenses for the street fund that I presented earlier, it's important to remember the finite aspect of the street fund. We've talked about this. This is the pavement bond history. And this was, again, the one-time infusion of about $12.3 million that Sean alluded to earlier. In fiscal year 1920, so the first part of the biennium budget, we spent $6 million. In the second part, which we're in, the second part of the biennium, which we're in right now, we've already spent $3.4 million. That's because the fiscal year happens to hit in the dead smack in the middle of our construction season. So it really messes up our funding allocations or our timing of the funding. But nonetheless, what this basically shows you is that we've spent $9.4 million already of that bond, and we're down to about 2.9 being remaining as of today or earlier this week when Sean ran the numbers for me. Moving forward in the next summer, maybe 2 summers, we'll be able to spend about $4.5 million in pavement work. And that's using ending fund balance from some of those other sources that we haven't spent yet. We anticipate about 2 years of about a $4.5 million paving goal. And then after that, it'll go down significantly. This is the fund balance conversation we've had a couple times. It's a good representation of the current and near future flow of funds. And the operations shown in blue are the staff and ongoing everyday maintenance from engineering and public works. The capital shown in green is the outlay for pavement and one of the pathway projects that we have underway at this time. And you can see how that is going to taper off as we rapidly spend down the bond money. So overall, the fund balance, which is shown in red, will drop back down to nearly the minimum rather quickly. So the high point, let's see if my pointer will work. There it does. This high point was us getting the bond and us rapidly spending it down over kind of 2 construction seasons and petering out here, tapering out here, where we get back down to what it's typically been, about a $2 million ending fund balance. I want to talk for a minute about the CIP as a whole, because this is another document that we take into consideration when we're doing all of this budgeting. The Capital Improvement Plan, or the CIP, incorporates the plan improvements from the TSP and maintenance needs for from the pavement studies that we conduct every 3 years. The first column here matches the approved biennium budget, and the second column is a projection, merely a projection, for the next 4 years after that. This third column is a placeholder for needs that are not expected to be funded within the CIP document horizon, which is only 4 to 6 years, and it's often referred to as the unfunded future projects. While we can certainly accomplish the current biennium budget regarding pavement, with the bond rapidly being spent, we won't likely be able to achieve the 22 million proposed for the next 4 years. I think I was overly optimistic about what we'd be able to do and how much money we'd have left over. So I'm anticipating that needs to be ratcheted back down or pushed out further, is what we typically do. The main takeaway from this slide, though, is to show that all of the unfunded needs, nearly $240 million, and that while we can't achieve them in a short time, it sets up the conversation for what we do want to achieve and in what amount of time and with what resources. And this leads us to the closing of our presentation, which is a conversation about choices for the future. So what are those choices? First and foremost, I strongly believe and would encourage council to continue to maintain the systems we already have in place. All of those things that were on the list before that need to be maintained: signing, striping, lights, signals, sidewalks. We recommend that the funding levels for those don't go down. In fact, they typically need to go in to increase annually to account for more assets and therefore more maintenance needs, more maintenance costs. After that, our choices are how to spend the remaining funds for capital, and much of the current conversation is about balancing between paving and pathways. What's not on here are future bridge needs, and I mentioned those, or they were shown on a slide, a couple slides before. Signal replacement needs. Most of our signals are well over 30 years old, and I anticipate some full replacements will be necessary within the next 10 years. So there's other things on there that we just, we don't talk about very often because they're working fine until they're not. But now we need to move into the future of paving and pathways. So paving choices. Recall that we conduct a pavement analysis every 3 years. The 2019 report indicated our PCI was at 69, but that was prior to most of the 2019 and the 2020 work being done. So we anticipate the PCI will have actually gone up anywhere from 2 to 4 points. We're going to do an estimate, an interim estimate of that PCI once we complete this year's paving, get the construction season finished, and some of our consulting staff is hoping to be able to do that and give us a kind of a back of the napkin estimate on what that PCI is. But we totally are expecting that it has gone up and should be above 70 at this point. That's the good news. Then in the future, well, just as a reminder, this past year we spent over $8 million in paving. And however, as we spend down that one-time bond money, our outlay for the next 2 years will be significantly less. Like I said, it might be around $4.5 million per year. So I'm anticipating likely $7 to $9 million over a 2-year period, and then significantly less after that. This map, do not take a picture of it, do not share with your neighbors, please, is very much a draft of what we think we might be paving in the next 2 years. It may change, but this is indicative of the work we will likely do, and it's kind of a 120% target. So we know we won't do all of this because we don't have that kind of money, but it's a starting point. And I'm using it in this conversation as a kind of a reference. Final choices will be made based on funds available after we close out this season's current project expenditures. But it gives you an idea, and we'll come back to this in a minute. The red in there is what we anticipate we might be able to do for 2021, so next summer, and then the blue would be the summer of 2022. Like I said, I'll come back to this for conversation pieces. And where do we begin with the pathways? As mentioned, the transportation system plan is the citywide planning process completed and updated about every 10 to 15 years in an effort to identify necessary transportation infrastructure. There are many categories of transportation needs identified, but we are sharing just the ones associated with new pathways and shared bike or pedestrian facilities that were identified in that document. The TSP was adopted in late 2014, and soon after that, we were directed to do specific things. One of them was to work on the Laurel Street pathway and then choose other TSP projects that were low-hanging fruit, or in other words, start with the relatively easier projects, because that's about all we had some funding for. So that's what we did. I just wanted to remind everybody, because you can lose track of it pretty quickly. But here's all the projects we've actually done that were path or bike related projects out of the TSP since about 2015, 2014, I think we started the design work on Kerr and Laurel, those in particular. These projects were completed either as a standalone project or in conjunction with larger paving projects. So if we were like on Kerr, we were doing a major paving project and we added a couple of the paving or a couple of the sidewalk improvements to that project and bundled it all together. They represent over $7 million in pathway and bike lane work that's been done in the past 5 years. And again, as mentioned and not listed here, we are working on the next project, which is Nosh Road from Boones Ferry Road to Goodall. TAB, our Transportation Advisory Board, was directed to figure out what the next projects should be and to prioritize the pathway projects based on proximity to schools and a benefit to those areas. The memo from the Transportation Advisory Board to the Council in July of this year did highlight their recommended priorities from this subset. So this is what they started with, this map that shows the yellow is a school location, and then these were identified nearby routes that were important from a school perspective. This visual shows the top 8 projects related to the school locations as identified and prioritized by the TAB. The criteria that they used for prioritizing included functional classification of the road. So was it an arterial, a local road, a neighborhood collector? What type of school? Elementary schools obviously got higher points as a need for safety to improve the safety for small children, proximity to school, and then how it finished the network. So during the prioritization process, we did solicit feedback from the school district, and the district was in favor of any and all projects and did not specify a preferred alternative prioritization. In fact, they were like, hey, do any one of them would be great. Let's get started. The school district is going to one day begin a more formal Safe Routes to School program once the world is back to some sort of normal state of activity and they're actually having school at facilities again. So we will be partnering with them at that time. However, our TSP and this prioritized list is a great place to start for any of those projects. This top 8 projects equates to $31 million, of which 17 million of it could be down to 17 million if it was supplemented with grants. So these larger projects, such as this one here on Boones Ferry Road, which happens to be the #1 project, it's about almost a $12 million project. Well, we're going to need outside funding for that and grants, and hopefully some regional funds can go to this someday. So if you took off these larger projects that are very expensive and need grant funding, then we're down to about $1.7 million in projects left on here that are still in the top 8. Okay, so now we get into the conversation about how to balance the various needs. And here's where we are. The conversation often comes down to how to change the balance of finite funding, maybe even changing that balance from the 97% that we do now, 97, 98% for paving and only a couple percent for other things. So right now, as I mentioned before, we have 16 million is being spent on paving and about 460 is set aside for the NOS pathway project. So that's about a 97-3 split. How does that balance change moving forward and what are the trade-offs? So just keep in mind that our pot of money from the bond infusion is going to run out and we will be back to base revenues being available in the future. But let's look at a reduction in the paving program and how or what that would look like if we went that direction. So taking this as an example, I wanted to look at 2 different scenarios. This is the same map I showed before about what our next 2 summers look like. One scenario is $500,000 removed from the paving program. You can see here, this area outlined in blue, I picked 2 of the streets that equate to about $500,000. So the trade-off would be remove these 2 from the list. Another scenario, if you said imbalance it by $1 million, what that means is you take off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is one scenario, projects, and that equates to almost $1 million. So that gives you an idea of what trade-off would mean. If we spend 500,000 more in pathways, what would that mean to the paving program? So these are a couple examples. As always, my recommendation is that if we have limited paving funds, they ought to go to preserving collectors and arterials first, which is where the heavier volumes and the emergency access needs are. So the level of pavement preservation and rehabilitation for local roads does tend to go off the list. What does that look like in comparison for school project options? So again, this is the previous school project map, and I've highlighted this one. where at 500, if we were to get 500,000 per year, we could take either one of the red circled projects, like this one right here. There's one of the projects, or maybe even this one coupled with possibly another small one, but it's kind of close. So we could do those projects for 500 a year. Or if we did a larger package, 1 million, we could do all of these as one larger package. One thing I do want to keep in mind is, as much as I would like to say we can spend $1 million a year on pathways, it does take about 2 years to do a project. From the time you start with the neighborhood engagement, which is critical on all of these projects, you don't want to skip that process. Completing the design and then bidding and constructing it, it is about a minimum time for 2 years to do that work from beginning to end if it all goes smoothly. There is no such thing as a simple sidewalk project anymore, especially when doing infill in existing neighborhoods such as this, and with all the, sometimes the terrain and right-of-way challenges that we have. So where do we go from here? I'm wrapping it up is what I'm doing. I think that with all of this information, it'll be helpful for council to direct staff at some point to generate guidance on what level of funding they want to move more projects forward in the future. And there's plenty of projects on the tab priority list to keep the city busy for many years, nearly 14 million that we could do just on the tab priority list. From there, the rest of the entire transportation system plan list is available for the consideration after that. So we have no shortage of needs and no shortage of projects to pick from. I like having the school ones being the top priority, gives us a great list going forward for several years. There was 37 projects, I think, on that list to begin with. With the bond money expended soon, the rate of pavement work will return to levels similar to pre-2018-19, and then it may be necessary to consider further funding options, such as system development charge rates. Do we want to change that and raise that rate to a higher level? Or even talk about the street maintenance fee rate as a source for more revenue to pay for both maintenance and expansion of these facilities. So there's some other options out there for further funding, or just the conversation about balancing what we do have available at a different level. So I ran through that rather quickly. I know there's probably a lot of questions, and I'm going to remove this so that I can see everybody.
Okay, let me get to the full screen here. Hang on a second. So Eric, and this is maybe Mayor Kent. What's your question?
Looking at your map there, I noticed that you had Bryant Road as one for pathways and that kind of thing. But, you know, I live close to that, and there's already a pathway, if you want to call it, not a sidewalk, but a pathway that goes, actually it goes down from Boone's Ferry. It's not so great from Boone's Ferry to Upper, but it goes down from there, and then there's that pathway that extends there to Childs Road, which is not a sidewalk, it's a pathway, some places on both sides of the street. When you're talking about pathways, are you talking about just sidewalks, or are you talking about paved things that are paths but not necessarily sidewalks?
Are you referring to the school list, Mayor? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first part.
When I looked at your map, you had Bryant Road, and you had a sidewalk that went quite a ways. It went all the way, I think, to South Shore or whatever. And I know.
Oh, Bryant, yes.
I know on Bryant right now, there's a paved pathway. So I'm wondering, are you talking about, when you're talking about pathways, are you talking about improving things like that to a sidewalk? Or I don't understand why you need to spend 16 million on that when there's that pathway's already there.
Well, so the projects all vary as to what they are, but they're basically pedestrian facilities. In some cases, you're right, there are existing pathways. Those pathways sometimes are just a widened shoulder, which is not really the safest thing for a pedestrian. So the project may be um, uh, a safer level for a pedestrian facility, such as a raised curb and sidewalk. Or in some cases, the project might be a separated pathway. So it does vary. Not all of these are the same kind of thing. They're not all curb, gutter, and sidewalk. Some of them are separated paths, and it just depends on what the needs are. These were identified as improvements, again, necessary to improve safety or fill gaps in some cases. So Bryant is a big project, and it's got a lot of hit and miss places where there aren't any facilities, and some places where the facility is just a shoulder, and some places where it's an asphalt pathway. So that's a big conglomerate project of needs. Maybe it'll be a lesser project, but it was identified.
Okay, thank you.
Al,
Thank you, Director Rooney. I thought that was a very excellent overview. Same for Sean. I didn't get a chance to thank him for that. The only thing I would request respectfully is this, to me, is a major agenda item, and I think it's you've got a lot of data here that should be digested, and it's a little difficult to digest it just in a short PowerPoint presentation. So my only request respectfully would be, if we have these issues in the future, I'd really appreciate a little time to review. So having said that, I need to understand a little bit about, on slide 15, you had the project totals, and that's the same number that I saw from the CIP. And my understanding was that that list was in fact prioritized and by somebody, I assume council, because they're the ones with the only authority to prioritize. So all of those projects on the CIP, starting on page 40, are prioritized already. And is that correct, or is that a misunderstanding?
Page 40 of the CIP?
Of the budget book.
I'm not.
It's more or less, it's more or less an appendix to the budget.
Oh, okay. Well,
Detail, and 112 projects or 120.
Okay. Now that list of the pathways in the budget in the CIP document, all of the unfunded were not shown in priority order. They were shown in alphabetical order, if I recall correctly. So everything down below, which was more than 6 years out, we call it unfunded, and that's not prioritized in that document. No.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, but that does make up the, over here on slide 15, where I was showing a snapshot of the capital, that's the unfunded future, timing not specified, and that's like $120 million.
Right. Yep. That was the same number I got. One other clarification. My understanding prior to this meeting was that our target for PCI was in the mid 80s. And I understood your presentation to say we wanted to be 70 or more, which I interpret to mean a minimum of 70, which seems like an extremely modest target in as much as we started in 2002 at 75. I understand 70 as a minimum means it can be in the upper 80s, but the message I'm getting from that is that if we hit 70, we met our objective, and now we can turn our attention to other priorities. Am I misunderstanding that?
So the history is that you're right. In the 2000s, we were in the 70s, and then we started dropping down, and we got into the 60s. And then council, through these conversations about the pavement condition, council set goals of like, we need to bring the PCI up to at least 70. 84, which is what you're talking about, is the sweet spot, which is the optimal PCI to maintain road system for the best return on your investment. Very few places can do that because it requires an enormous amount of funding. I believe, Anthony's going to correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we needed $80 million to do that. That obviously wasn't going to happen. It was an unreasonable amount. So council said, let's at least get it to 70 again. So those were numbers we set with council conversation, just so that we could start to turn it around in the right direction. But pavement requires constant infusion of money and maintenance, and it never ends.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Councilor Kohoff.
Director Rooney, did I understand correctly that if we were to do the safe routes to school list, it would come out about 31 million?
Let me get back.
What I wrote down.
Yeah, to do the top 8 projects that we had listed on there that was recommended by TAB is yes, around 31 million. However, if we took
Go ahead.
oh, sorry. If we took the really large projects off, because maybe we can get, grant funding and other outside funding for those, maybe they'd qualify for regional funds. The rest of the top 8 equates to about 1.7 million.
Right. But if we did 31 million and we hoped for the best in grants and so forth, what you didn't list, because there's always this reluctance and hesitation to raise the transportation SDCs, but what you didn't list was GO bond. I mean, you went for GO bond for paving at 12 million. What would be so horrendous? Because we constantly hear people say that they want these pathways and they certainly want the safe routes to school. Why would it be so off the mark to go for a GO bond to get those done? That would help the people. We don't need to be driving so much.
Erica, do you have a response there? Or
I'm not going to be able to answer our bonding capacity on a citywide level yet.
Yeah.
Maybe Sean can help me with that. I don't know. I mean, yes, it's an option to consider going out for a geo bond.
Okay, Aaron, I think I saw your hand up. Go ahead. And then Jackie, I'll get you.
Jackie was first. Go ahead.
Oh,
Jackie.
Okay.
Please.
Sorry, you're down in the corner, Jackie. I didn't see you.
You owe me, Jackie. I get the next one.
Okay, couple of real quick questions for Director Rooney. Dig once. Are we still trying to do that where possible?
Yes, we are. Absolutely. We do take a look at that. That does help us. That's part of what we do when we're looking at that map for the next 2 years. Lots of conversation goes on with our other infrastructure sections to talk about where's a wastewater project, where's a water project. Can we tie them together, or do we need to push one of them or another one off? Avoid paving for a few more years on certain projects because we know the water project is coming in a couple of years. That's a constant iterative discussion that we do maintain because we try to uphold that dig once approach. Yes.
You know I have to ask this.
I appreciate
every time we talk.
I appreciate it.
The other question I've often had is the dollar amount of pathways that we have in our TSP. Some of those are probably not germane any longer, or neighborhoods don't want them. I know that our Transportation Advisory Board has gone through them, but I think it would be good for council, especially next year when we have new councilors coming in, to take a little more in-depth look. I don't know who would do that, but I want to throw that one out there. And speaking of our Transportation Advisory Board, they have been absolutely fantastic. My many years of asking for, panhandling for $250 for bike paths or trails, they've been great. And I appreciate your zippy presentation of a lot of data. So thank you. That's all I had to say.
Thank you.
Okay, Aaron, you're up.
Thanks. I'm gonna try to cram in 3 questions because the new format is kind of weird for asking questions, so bear with me. The first question I had was the consultant fees you pay per year for the various paving projects we have. How much would you estimate the city's paying in consultant fees?
I would say it's not on a per year basis, but overall, they are anywhere from 10 to 15, maybe 18% of the total cost.
Okay. Second question I had was on a slide earlier, it said part of the capital outlay was 460 grand for sidewalks. Is that a certain project or is that total for the year?
Right now, that's the biennium amount set aside, and it's going towards the Noss Road project that is currently almost ready to bid out.
Okay, so is that the cost of just the sidewalk by itself, or is that the cost we incur when we do the dig once, new road, add the sidewalk?
So on the Noss Road project, it's.
So I think like there's gotta be economies of scale somewhere around here, so like probably costs more just to put a sidewalk in than if you were just to add a sidewalk to a road, a paving project.
This is not being done in conjunction with the paving project. We're adding a separated sidewalk or pathway, excuse me, asphalt pathway, and some storm water has to be accommodated. So it's for that. It has nothing to do with a paving project.
That's what I was getting to. Yeah, it's a separate cost. So and then the last question I had was the budget hole, if I understand you correctly, the budget hole you're looking at, that we're looking at here today, is not necessarily the 30 million, it's 2 million is the budget gap that we're looking for these projects. Is that, am I missing something? Anybody else jump in if I misheard, but is that correct?
This is on paths or
for the path projects.
For paths.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by budget hole. I don't.
Well, it sounds like we have to choose a path forward, and that's usually a result of not having funds to do everything, right? So what's the gap?
Quite a bit more than 2 million.
So back to what we were saying, it's the 31.
Well, it depends on really what we're talking about is determining what level, how much money does, if a conversation is to be had, how much more do you want to put towards paths and then therefore take out of paving?
Got it. Okay.
I found these.
I have a question. Director Rooney and I talked, and I complimented her previous today in regard to how great the streets are around Lake Oswego. Best I remember, really, to tell you the truth. And I've been here ages. So my question is, okay, so we have about 3 million left in the bond, I believe, and then we're going to find another $1.5 million. So we'll do about $4.5 million worth of work in 2021 paving season. My question to you in regard to paving, and then I'm going to come to the pathways. Do we need to increase that so that we don't slip back under 70? Because we're going to be at 73-ish, maybe after the next grading period. So what's your take on it? I mean, is 4.5 million enough for this town to maintain what we have basically and get our levels up?
No, it's nowhere close to being able to maintain. And then we'd have to go back and talk about the pavement condition index study, which, hang on, I'm gonna grab it here, which again, done in 2019, in order to reach a PCI of 84, we needed to be budgeting, 25 million the first year, 8 the second, 8 the third, 6 the fourth, eighth, the fifth year. We're talking significantly more money than we've ever had available, and that's to reach a PCI of 84. And there was different scenarios of budgeting levels, but all of them were far above what we are doing, even with the $12 million bond.
So, and then what Aaron was talking about on the pathways, we're short 31 million or more there too. So we're talking a pretty big number here.
Just to, and that's 31 million just to do the ones that are associated with the school.
Right.
Yeah. There's $240 million worth of path and bike related improvements identified in the transportation system plan.
Okay. I'm not sure if John. We'll go with Councilor Lamont and then Councilor Went. Oh, I'm sorry. I know you're shocked.
All right, first, Eric, is a big picture. So the bond was a short-term bond that's funded by the 2017 state transportation program. Is that correct? The revenue from that?
Yes.
So is that program, forgetting whether we have a bond or not, is that a continuous program forever, or is that done in 5 years?
The House Bill 2017?
Well, when we got the money allocated through the state fund in 2017, we decided to bond against that because the revenues are coming in. But you're saying the bond revenues are out in 5 years. We're still going to get the revenue from the state every year, though.
Yeah, but what's the debt service of the bond, Sean?
All right, so the bond's debt service is spread out.
That's what we're paying for.
Okay, for 10 years.
$1,000 a year for the next 20 years.
Oh, 20 years. Okay. And then back to what Aaron was saying, the 460,000 in that budget was for paths and curb ramps. That's really Noss Road, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So to me, to finally address our January 2019 goal of upping our game and prioritizing path trails, especially safe routes to schools, we have to make a policy discussion. Obviously, we're not making big decisions tonight, but it's got to come into the goal session again, because this will make 2 years that we haven't done anything. And I think the $300,000 that we last left the budget committee with, that extra money, that's part of the 460,000 for NOS. Is that right? Okay. So we have zero for paths, trails, and safe routes to schools. And I think looking at the big number is distracting. We've got to get to some of the top priority ones. And when I was liaison to TAB, we talked about taking that big Boones Ferry Road 11 million thing off because it skews it and looks for grants. And then we've got a list that has been prioritized to get our kids to school on feet and on bike. And we need to get some money every year, annually, regularly towards that, so we're not beg, borrowing, squealing for the next 20 years to do some of those paths. Paving is always going to be needed, and we got to keep that up. We got to push, as some of our board members said, for the 70 at a minimum. But we've got a policy discussion right here. Are we going to address paths or trails, or we might as well just take them off the CIP and tell people, no, we're not going to do it? I think our school district has weighed in and said anything you can do is better than nothing. So we've got to get to that policy discussion sooner than later. And then the other thing is the SDCs are part of that overall paving program, right?
No.
No.
They can't.
Okay, so,
SDCs cannot be used for any paving.
For new capacity. So what is the SDC's funding right now in paving?
Nothing. It doesn't go for any paving. SDCs can only be used for capacity improvement, which is new signals. In particular, they can pay for 100% of signals, and a portion of it can go to things such as bike and ped facilities, but not 100%.
Okay, so some of that could go to Bryant Road that is all chopped up and missing gaps and wide, not wide, right? New capacity.
A portion of it, a portion of the SDC, a project on Bryant, some SDC money could be used for it, but there isn't any because we're using it on a signal right now.
Okay, one signal. Okay. But I just want to make sure that we're addressing, I don't think anybody's saying do 21 million, 31 million, 278 million. That's unrealistic. It's just, if we have the goal, which we approved, it'll be 2 years this January that it hasn't been addressed.
Well,
so where are we going to go with that? You gave us two options.
We have been working on the Noss Road project since in the last year and a half. That's what we've been working on.
Right. But then there's this big list. So we have, if I got it right, you've got option A is 500,000 or option B is $1 million, which would come out of the paving program. right? So that's what we need to discuss. Don't address them, 500,000 or a million, right?
Or anything in between. It's
Or
just those
anything in
were
between.
examples of what that would look like as a trade-off conversation. Yeah.
Okay, John, let's go to Councilor Wendland, please.
The other John.
The other
So,
John.
John
2?
John 2, actually John 1. But
Okay.
anyway, I guess there's a couple things. I mean, if we generally have about $4.5 million a year to fund $220 million in projects, it's going to take 50 years, which is longer than pretty much everyone will be here. So obviously we're not addressing things at the rate of deterioration. My question is two. One, I would challenge us to look at other funding sources within the budget or somewhere else priority-wise if we want to fund the what I would call the $2 million in bike and pedestrian projects that you kind of identified that are the low-hanging fruit. And then my other question, or tell me about the process to get the big funded things, the two $16 million things. Is that like a 10-year project that we would take on with the state and the county? And have we started that? How do we start that? Do they not give money to Lake Oswego because they think we have too much money? I mean, what's the process that we would go through, and have we started that to get these other big projects? Because to me, that's the only way we're going to even get any sort of a dent into the backlog, because we're not even treading water, basically, because the money that we're spending for current paving is not even probably going to keep us up to a 73 index each year. So I don't know. How do you get money for big projects? Anyone?
Hans?
So let me see if I can answer the question about the big projects. In particular, the Boones Ferry Road one that was on the tab list. Looking at it here, it was about $11.1 million. That is on the regional transportation plan list, along with several hundreds of other projects in the metropolitan area. So we compete for regional and state funds throughout the region and throughout the state. And depending on the criteria of the color of money has a lot of criteria associated with it. And depending on those criteria, we may or may not bode well, depending on what the criteria is for the different types of money that are available. But we are on list for several projects in the TSP. Probably, I think 4 or 5 of our bigger projects are in regional listings. But along with hundreds of other projects, they might sit there for years and years and years before they ever meet enough criteria to be considered for funding. It's extremely competitive.
Okay, first, before we take the next question, I want to ask everybody, we've been doing this for 2 hours and 10 minutes now. So do we need to take a break and come back, restart in 10 minutes, or do we just keep plowing through? I'm okay either way.
Plow through.
What's that?
I say we keep going.
Get
Yeah.
going,
Keep
but let's
going.
get it over with.
Okay, we'll keep going. I think what I'd like to do is this current discussion, what's next, Martha? It's your wrap up, right?
I'm just going to read you my list of what we're thinking about and make sure I capture anything you guys want us to be thinking about for the upcoming biennium.
Okay. The way I hear this conversation going is that we're concerned about maybe we don't have enough money to spend on paving and then pathways, and we've set some goals, and maybe we haven't gotten as far along as we'd like to. So Okay, let's see, Aaron, are you the next hand up, I think, and then Al, you're next.
You know what,
Let's keep
I
the,
think we should keep it rolling and just, if there's, are we gonna have a follow-up meeting after this? So it's really just, we can comment all day long, but if we don't get moving to some sort of actual tactical business,
right.
you know what I mean?
Well, and then also, I'd like to make sure that we keep the questions brief and to the point, so that we can get through this tonight if we can. So, and I also agree that if we're just going to talk about it, if we have no decision making tonight, there's a limit to how much we can talk about it. So,
Scott, I think Sean laid out from the beginning. This meeting is not one where we can make changes in the budget.
yeah, it isn't.
It isn't that, this is basically an informational meeting, and the changes in the budget that you want to make come about in March of next year after
Right.
the council has set the policy guides for our goals, I mean.
That's the way I understand it also, right, Sean? Okay. So there's a limit to what we can do tonight. This is an informational meeting. Gives us some direction for our next meeting in March. I don't see a further meeting this year. Do I miss my guess there?
No,
I'm not sure. That's to Aaron's question.
no, you
The
don't miss
Budget
it.
Committee.
No, this is the only meeting. And
That's what I
the
thought.
off,
Okay.
this is the off-season kind of meeting.
Right.
And then we will go through the whole budget process again, where we have the pre-meeting, and then we'll go through the whole meetings again, where there is a budget, there is, you can make adjustments to it and all that stuff.
Okay. We'll take a few more questions and then we're going to go to Martha. Okay, so next question, and we're going to keep them concise. Okay, Al.
This will be very concise. So I think that I'm just confused a little bit about any opportunity there may be for alternative sources of funding other than taking it away from pavement. So my question is there something preventing us from using, for example, the excess general fund surplus that we know has been generated after the first fiscal year of the biennium of about 2 million? Is there something preventing us from using that? And is there something preventing us from using whatever residual there may be left in the Parks and Rec bond? And as of June, I think there was about 10 million left, and it may all be allocated by now, but I don't know at that time it was about 10 million. And third, then Director Rooney, I guess I had a misunderstanding about SDCs. I thought that a case could be made if a project had to do with capacity expansion. So capacity may mean only a road where a car can go on it. I don't know, but I don't know if a case can be made for capacity in terms of pathways.
Okay, there was 3 questions there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
Okay,
not sure
so-
about all those questions.
So the first question is for the fund balance, and we do every cycle. That is part of the funds that we usually come back with, and so we say this is the dollar amounts that we have above what our operating budget and what we had projected. What would you like to? So we've done stuff like the Waluga Ball Field. We've done things like Hazelia Field. That is where those funds came from to actually do those projects. Is what you're talking about? The residuals coming where we did better than what our conservative budget did for us. That's how we get the one-time monies to do these one-time projects. Yes. The second one, parks GO bonds, the way it can only be spent on parks projects. So if there's like a park path, yes. A different path, no. It can only be spent on parks projects. You're up, Erica.
Okay. And the third piece is, yes, SDCs can be used for capacity, increased capacity for bike and PEDs, but not at 100% rate. So, and there's a formula, and it's in our rate models and all of that says X percent. I'm just going to say you can fund a sidewalk with 20% SDCs. There's a number. I'd have to go look it up and see. And that's actually how we determined our SDC rates, is we took all of the transportation system plan projects allocated them on the percentage of how much SDCs could be used for them. And that's how we set our rates, was based on the need, the millions and millions of dollars of need in the transportation system plan and how much SDCs could be used to pay for those. So we can use some, and we are, like we're using a little bit of SDCs on the Noss Road pathway, but we can't fund it at 100% level.
Okay, thank you.
I should reiterate something that Erica said earlier. We are using all the available SDCs right now on a signal project, so there isn't money that's available to be used for SDCs right now.
There's not a pot of money left over, no. And then, and the SDCs aren't coming in very high anymore because most of the commercial projects are tapering
Tapered
off.
off, right?
Yeah.
Okay, further questions?
Is that a hand with
Okay.
Aaron?
Excuse me?
Yeah, last question. So Sean, are we on the park bond? Are we servicing all the debt of that 30 million now currently? So if we spend any more of that, it's not going to create more debt service for us?
No, we sold 24 of the 30 million authorized. So the idea was, as the 3 Geo park bonds came off, we would replace them with with new debt. 2 of them came off, so we sold one big chunk of bond, and then as we pay off the 3rd bond, we'll issue another one. And it's about 6 million that I think we still have authorized.
And would, to Al's point, would that be available to use for pathways if we ever wanted to?
No, and not for the Safe Routes to Schools projects. In March of this year, the council approved the list of projects. And there are some pathway projects that are on that list, but they're all pathway projects that are identified in the Parks Master Plan. So none of these Safe Routes to Schools, which are in the right of way, are eligible for those funds.
Thank you.
Okay.
Scott, I think
yes,
that
Counselor.
I believe that Shannon Cruz has a question. I'm not sure.
Oh, does Shannon have one? Thank you for helping me there.
Thank you, Daniel. I was curious from Erica, with that 2019 transportation report, did that come out with a list of priorities over a list of recommendations or a wish list? I didn't know, with all of the projects that were looked at, or the sidewalks, all of the different areas that needed work, was it listed in a way that which ones would need to be done first?
Okay, so there might be a little confusion there. The 2019 report that I refer to is the pavement condition index, and that has to do with paving projects. And there is a bit of a prioritization to those, in the sense that they put them in the order of PCI, and then we have to take that into consideration, but it's not the only thing. So that has to do only with paving. What you're probably, I think, referring to is our transportation system plan, which came out in late 2014, which has all the transportation projects in it. And that listing was not prioritized. There's history going back into 2012. It was prioritized at one time, and then people didn't like the way it was prioritized, so we unprioritized it. What ended up in the approved document was an unprioritized list. We have prioritized it. You can prioritize it a lot of different ways. What we've done is we've taken the school-related projects out of that, asked TAB to look at those in particular, so that's like 37 projects, look at that in particular and prioritize those. So it's a subset of the transportation system plan, but all
Wonderful.
Came from the same place back in 2014.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to get you any of those documents if you need. Anybody?
I would like that. Thank you.
A note to Shannon and Lynn. I remember my first budget meeting, my head was swirling around. It still does to some extent. It's pretty baffling. So hang in there. You'll figure it out soon enough.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a challenge to figure out how all this goes. Okay, I would like to transition to Martha now. So
I am honestly not going to go very deep on this. When Sean and I were talking about sort of what we thought you might want to know that we aren't covering tonight, I thought I'd just give you a sneak peek into what I think the budget issues are going to be going into fiscal or biennium 2021 to 23. So top of my list is PERS. Sean is prepared to go deep with you on PERS. I'm going to tell him not to tonight because it's I haven't had dinner. And but we will see a significant increase in our PERS rate, and I always tell people that we'll say it's an increase of 3%, but it's an increase of 3% of total payroll. So it actually turns out to be about a 12% increase in our PERS rates. Other personnel costs, of course, that's probably number two, is things that we pay attention to in terms of wage increases. I know that we are going to have a significant savings in our healthcare costs that hopefully will offset some of the wage increases that we're going to have. The third issue on my list is recession-related activities, anything where we have revenue that is business-related. I told you tonight that we haven't seen construction activity slack. I'm surprised that we haven't. So we'll be paying attention to those issues. Next issue on my list is the fire department. I'm surprised that Al didn't ask Sean a question about the fire department earlier tonight. But we do have to address the long-term financial sustainability of that service. And then last but not least is our ability to pay for capital projects. You heard the one tonight that the council will give us direction on in early January related to the street fund, but we do also have significant capital related needs in all of our utilities. That will be something where, I always tell people, just like everything else with capital, you want to do it just in time, right? You want to delay a capital project to the place where it becomes like really, really expensive if you don't do it on that day, and no sooner than that. So we'll be spending a lot of our energy on that. Okay, is there anything else on anybody else's mind from prior budgets that I need to know about before I start to work with the department heads and the council to build a budget? Yeah, Councilor Wendland.
I would suggest that because we're in a biennium situation, and I think we have more things on the bigger project list, meaning the unfunded capital projects and so on, it might be helpful to reconvene the budget committee earlier than the as an introduction meeting to maybe talk through a couple of these bigger issues and get some feedback and ideas, because I think there's enough to be talked about, and then we can go into the regular budget cycle.
Well, and the challenge, and Jennifer's going to turn her camera on really soon. The challenge is that we can we can talk generally about issues, but you guys can't actually start to deliberate on the budget under Oregon law until we actually deliver the budget and the budget message to you. So we'll try to walk that dance between sort of talking about the financial and fiscal issues in broad strokes without getting into conversation. Right. And I realize that it can be frustrating to show up for a meeting where we talk to you about concepts. And then you're like, what do you want us to do? And I say, nothing until April. So.
Well, it's mainly education. And
yeah,
then,
no, I hear you. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me go to Councilor Lamont.
Well, I would just say, I echo the same sentiments that Councilor Wendland has, is that if we had something maybe in late January to introduce the new councilors and the new mayor, and then it gives another chance for Lynn and Shannon to catch up, and it's strictly informational, and they get the information soon. And I also want to make sure that for the March meeting that the committee gets the stuff way early, because we can't do it in a week. We got to get as much stuff as we can.
Yeah, understood. Let us work on the timing. Sometimes January is not a great month to actually do something like this, but we'll work on the timing. I hear what you're saying in terms of not waiting until that first budget committee meeting and then trying to dump it on everybody at once. Okay, right. Councilor Mans.
Yes, everyone has the right to speak with Sean Cross, Martha Bennett, Brad Stevens about any questions that they may have on the budget, if I'm not mistaken, right?
We'd love to talk about something besides COVID.
Yeah, there you go. The second thing is we are never, ever, ever going to have roads like Switzerland. So we're very fortunate that we have the roads that we have. I wouldn't mind dialing it down a little bit. That's my final piece. But thank you all very, very much for an excellent meeting. It was so nice meeting all of you. I don't know if we're done. I'm just saying thank you. Good night.
Before we finish, I'd like to take an opportunity to give a great shout out to our first responders. We had the huge windstorm, and then we had fires going along with us. These guys were not only helping and taking care of things here, they were also helping in other communities. So if you see them, tell them they did a great job. It's been fantastic.
You bet.
Absolutely.
And don't forget the unsung heroes on the street crew too, who were out there in the middle of the night, the night we had the windstorm, clearing up our streets so we could be safe.
That's a good way to segue to an end. Really good. Thank you, Mayor Kent. All right. Any further comments for the good of the order? Martha needs dinner, and maybe a few others do too. So thank you to all of you. And let's talk about possibly putting something together in late Jan, February, something like that, if we feel that we need to. I think we've talked like that before, and we haven't really put it together. But I think we should have a firm agenda about where we want to go with it. That would be my wish. And really talk about things. Yes, Councilor O'Neill.
Scott, this is my last meeting and the mayor's. And I want to say to the mayor, not only did he give us an unbelievable 8 years, but he also gave us many years prior to that on the budget committee. So kudos to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks.
Yes.
Oh, I need a cookie.
We'll send cookies to Kent's house. Okay, good.
Skip, Skip, YouTube, thank you for all your work. John, Teresa, wherever you guys end up next, all of you deserve, a lot of kudos for serving. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, with all that, I will call the meeting adjourned of the Budget Committee of Lake Oswego.
Good job, Scott.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
Scott.